All right. Hey, everybody. Good evening. Hope you're doing all well. You've come to the right place at the right time. This is the thrilling conclusion of 3 weeks of events and readings for Fishtrap Reads. Tonight's very special because it's the finale with our author, Andrew Krivak. Andrew, how often do you get a chance to read a book that you love and then get to meet the author and ask them questions? This is pretty great. I wanted to tell you, this morning
Once a year.
Once a year.
Thanks to you people.
Gosh, you're right. Summer Fishtrap. By the way, registration's open now. We had about 60 students from 3 Wallowa County schools this morning, and what a blast. They had such incredible questions for Andrew, and they were so well prepared, and it was just really fun. There was a line of them trying to get him to sign their books afterwards.
You didn't have to try. I'll sign it.
Yeah, right. And that's just a way, Fishtrap has provided more than 300 free books to schools and libraries in Wallowa and Union counties. And so, the goal every year of this program is to find a book that resonates with the community and people can all read it together and share it as a community. So we're really happy about that. The other thing I want to tell you is that before we get going too far, we had a couple great program partners this year, which we've had for the past several. The Book Loft, thanks Book Loft, and Cook Memorial Library in LeGrand. And maybe you folks are watching out there on internet land at fishtrap.org or on Fishtrap's YouTube channel. Andrew's going to appear there tomorrow morning, so on his way out. But a couple quick notes. We also have some sponsors. I think most of you folks know that Fishtrap didn't take any funding for the big read this year, so thus it's Fishtrap Reads. But some other organizations really did come up and help us do that, including Oregon Arts Commission, Pacific Power Foundation, STCU Bank, and Eagle Cap Vacation Rentals, which donated the room for Andrew for this past couple nights. And so we want to thank those folks, and when you see them, and of course all the individuals and organizations and clubs who support Fishtrap programming, you make all this possible. A few months ago when I reached out to Andrew, I was saying, hey, would you, his book is, The Bear is a big read book, and we had already planned on doing the big read, choosing this book. But when we decided that we were going independent, I said, well, we'd love to have you come, but we can't pay you what we originally, would you still be willing to come? And to his credit, he said, yeah, I'll come to your community. I'm doing it for the adventure. On top of that, yesterday, Andrew got up at 3:30 in the morning, took an Uber to the airport in Boston, went through TSA, got on an airplane, flew to Minneapolis, got off of the airplane, got on another airplane, flew to Boise, rented a car, and then drove 4 hours to get here to see us.
Don't expect the Uber to take you back.
Honestly, you had me at fish.
Right? We tried to get him hooked into some steelhead this weekend, but it was a little chilly. All right, so this is going to be a conversation between Shannon McNerney, Fishtrap's Executive Director, Shannon McNerney, and Andrew Krivak. I just want to tell you a little bit more about Andrew. Hopefully you've all at least been into the book a little bit. Andrew Krivak is the author of 5 novels, 2 chapbooks of poetry, and 2 works of nonfiction. His debut novel, The Sojourn, was a National Book Award finalist and a winner of both the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for fiction and the inaugural Chautauqua Prize. His 3rd novel is The Bear. It's received the Banff Mountain Book Prize for fiction and is a National Endowment for the Arts Big Read title. We know that. Andrew, we've learned a lot about Andrew's interests in skiing, skating, fishing, mountain climbing, and hopefully you'll learn more about that. But academically, he holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University, an MA in philosophy from Fordham, and a PhD in literature modernism from Rutgers University. Overachiever. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts. I should say a lifelong learner. Yeah. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Give a gigantic Wallowa County welcome to Andrew Krivak.
So welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you have had an opportunity to attend one of our Big Read finales in the last few years, you'll get a little bit of a sense of what's going to happen. But I always like to leave it up to the author, whether he wants to get up on a podium and read for you for a while or if we want to have a conversation. And Andrew decided, let's have a conversation. So here's what's going to happen for the next about 40 minutes. We're going to have one of those conversations that you wish you had a blankie and maybe a nice glass of something and you were eavesdropping, or you're sitting at a really nice restaurant and you're getting to hang out with some folks having a conversation, and then you get to think about what you want to ask at the end. So in about 40 minutes, we'll have some opportunities for questions. For those of you that are watching online, our rock star Janice Carper is going to be monitoring our YouTube channel, so feel free to type in questions. I make no promises that all of you will get your questions answered. We have limited time. And I will say this again at the end. Do remember, if you know what I'm going to say, you get a point, that a question starts with who, what, why, where, when, and how. And if you have an anecdote, write it down and send it in an email later. So protect your reputation and the love of the people around you. So, so that's how this is going to go. So with that, we just had a little conversation back there, and I wanted to give Andrew a chance to read, but he gave me the first question, which I think is a really solid one, is what led you to write a novel like The Bear? And give us some idea about the form and the context.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I'd want to say thank you for inviting me. And also thank you for reading my novel. I think any writer who writes can only say to those people who read him or her is thank you. So I'm grateful for that. And yeah, it's a long way, but it's all the journey. That's what it's all about. So I'd do it again. I'd go this far. I'd go farther. So The Bear, speaking of journeys, I'll tell you that, so it's my 3rd novel, and after my first novel, I thought oh, this is good. I'm on this trajectory, right? And then the 2nd novel, I was in the middle of being a stay-at-home dad for 3 kids and trying to write and teaching and then realizing that the publishing world is not really as nurturing as you might imagine. And so, but that's okay. I think part of being a writer in the process is coming to realize that you have only control of what you write, what you put on the page when you're alone in that room with words. And that's where the power of your own agency comes. After that, you got to let it go. But so The Bear, my wife and I had bought this place in New Hampshire 11 years ago now. And a couple things. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I grew up in a place that was not very creatively supportive. My folks were. My family was great. We were outside a lot. But I wanted to read books. I wanted to do well in school, and that was not always accepted. So I fought for my mind with my hands often. And that just made it more of a better struggle. So there was a certain anxiety growing up about what am I going to be if this is what I want to be, and how is it going to shake out? Fast forward to where I am in the 3rd novel, and there's an element of growing up in the East, and as much in New England as in Pennsylvania, of the smell of the dirt, the smell of the water, the sound of the birds, the natural environment. And I realized in my 50s, in that place, that I had become who I am as a writer. And that sort of anxiety as a kid just drifted away, and I thought, wow, what a gift. This is where I'm going to be. This is where I'm going to write a book, the next book. And what I always wanted to do, thanks to the publishing industry, I now decided I was going to write exactly what I wanted to write. I wanted to write the book I wanted to read. And I had always been fascinated by this idea of nature as a first actor, the protagonist. Nature as a protagonist, not some passive stage across which we walk and worry about it or not worry about it, but I didn't want it to be a passive stage. What would it look like if the story, the protagonist of the story, was nature itself? So Long Story Bearable, which actually became a shorter novel, but I conceived of first this idea of a man and his daughter living close to the land in a place like this in New England, and I couldn't get it right. One of the best things that an early editor said to me when I was writing was, everybody has a subject. The question is, what's the story? Writers have a story. Anything you write has got to have that narrative arc, which goes all the way back to the Greeks. Aristotle said the same thing in the Poetics. I didn't know what the story was. I got them middle of the book, and they were separated, so I knew it would be a journey narrative. Something of a domestic narrative with the father at home, the daughter lost in the woods, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I was out fishing one day, as I do, and and I was in a rowboat early morning on the pond, Thorndike Pond, where I live, and I had been thinking a lot about the Laurentide ice sheet. That I was living in a place where barely 11,000 years ago, it was covered in a 2-mile high wall of ice. And I thought that must have been, what's that? Oh, yeah. Let's do that. There you go. There's the slide of the Laurentide ice sheet. Came down to northern Pennsylvania. And if you know Barry Lopez, he talks in Arctic Dreams about the fact that the Arctic is really only 10,000 years old, which is a blink. So I was thinking, wow, it must really been beautiful for those first peoples following this ice sheet for thousands of years and generations in the shadow of it. And then I thought, I wonder what it's going to be like for the last. And I thought, that's it. They're the last two. And that's how I can make the man and the girl follow an entirely different arc. So I rowed my boat back to shore, and I ran up to the house and sat down at my writing desk, and I wrote this. The last two were a girl and her father who lived along the old eastern range on the side of a mountain they called the mountain that stands alone. The man had come there with a woman when they were young and built a house out of timber, stones pulled from the ground, and mortar they made with a mix of mud and sand. It was set halfway up the mountain slope and looked out onto a lake ringed with birch trees and blueberry bushes that ripened in summer with great bunches of fruit the girl and her father would pick as the two floated along the shore in a canoe. From a small window in front of the house, the glass, a gift the woman's parents had given to her after having received it themselves from the generation before, so precious a thing had it become as the skill for making it was lost and forgotten. The girl could see eagles catching fish in the shallows of an island that rose from the middle of the lake and hear the cries of loons in the morning while her breakfast cooked over a hearth fire. That's Monadnock Mountain, which means literally in Lenape, I believe, the mountain that stands alone. And Monadnock in geology, small m, is just a mountain that's surrounded by nothing else, just itself. And that's Thorndike Pond. That's a painting by the painter Abbott Henderson Thayer of Monadnock. And this is Monadnock in winter. That's it from my dining room window. And this is the pond, Thorndike Pond, which is a pretty good sized lake-sized pond. But and so this was the landscape. I just thought, okay, I'm going to put it here because this is where I am. And with this slide of winter, I'll go on another paragraph or two. In winter, the snows began not long after the autumn equinox and still visited the mountain months after the spring. Storms lasted for days and weeks at a time, drifts climbing up against the house and burying paths as deep as some trees grew high. Often the man had to wait for firewood or trudge out to his tool shed at the edge of the forest with a rope tied around his waist. But when the winds settled, the skies cleared, and the low sun shone again, the man would wrap the young girl warm and tight in a pack, walk out into the stillness of winter, and float on snowshoes made of ash limbs and rawhide down to the frozen lake where the two would spend the day fishing for trout and perch through the ice. Snow covered so much of the girl's world from mountaintop to lake that for almost half the year, all she could see when she looked out that window was a landscape at rest beneath a blanket of white. And yet, no matter how long winter lasted, spring followed, its arrival soft and somehow surprising, like the notes of bird song upon waking or the tap of water slipping in a droplet from a branch to the ground. As the snow melted, black rocks, gray lichen, and brown leaf cover emerged from the once uniform palette of the forest floor, and the thin, silvery outlines of trees began to brighten with leaves of green against the grouping of hemlock and pine. Those were the days when the girl left the house in the morning with her father and studied a new world that pushed up from the dirt of the forest and emerged from the water at the edge of the lake. Days in which she lay on the ground beneath the warm sun and wondered if world and time itself were like the hawk and eagle soaring above her in long arcs she knew were only part of their flight, for they must have begun and returned to some place as of yet unseen by her, some place as of yet unknown. So that's the origin. Yeah.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that read again. That's lovely. I also wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the structure of the writing. It's come up a lot in some of our conversations here about the writing style, the way you put the prose together, the decision to not use punctuation, that there's very little exposition, that there's lots of space and gaps in the writing, which I love. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think so. Every novel I feel like is a journey into a new place, and I've purposely tried to formally do something different in every book I write, and that really takes off in this new one.
I'm excited. Yeah.
but for the bear, there was I needed to be authentic to the landscape, and so I thought, well, if I'm going to be authentic to the content, I have to be authentic formally as well. And also too, I just am drawn to those writers who are who make every word count. Cormac McCarthy is probably my guru. Although no one who can say that they want to write like Cormac McCarthy. That's just nuts. So
You do.
no, don't say that. But my point is that it's if it's going to be. Let me say this. Clearly, this is going to be a life for this man and the girl that is unadorned and is as much a place of beauty as a place of struggle, and is as they are as celebratory of the natural world as they are in need of it for their survival. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of dynamic I tried to capture formally in the prose. You heard me tell the students this morning, I said, unless her name is Emily, there should be no adverbs, no LYs in your writing whatsoever. And I tried to stick to that. I did notice a few as I was reading, and I thought, oh, damn, But more to the point, I just try to do that in general because, look, it's, if you need to have a modifier, you got to ask yourself, is it the modifier or is it the verb or the noun that needs just to be better? Mm-hmm. So that's how I think about it. So I try to write a better noun, come up with a better noun, write a better verb, and it's action, it's motion. Mm-hmm. The writing's got to be in motion as well as the story. So I think if you've read the novel, you would. I hope that you're like, oh yeah, that I see now why that's so darn stripped down and spare. But I also tried to be. I wanted it to be beautiful. Mm-hmm. And because I was not interested in writing science fiction. I'm not interested in young adult literature. I think it's fantastic. And any students who read, no matter what, is fantastic. And let's say this. I will say this. I was not thinking about the extinction of the human race when I sat down to write The Bear. That's a true story, a true fact. The idea of the last two was more thinking about the notion of storytelling as a whole. Why does the human race think that if every other story has a beginning and a middle and an end, that our story won't come to an end? Mm-hmm. And, none of us here will ever see that. Our children won't, or our children's children won't. But it's kind of hubristic to think that it won't be. And so my point was that literary fiction can try to think about that formally as well as in the content of a story.
I thank you. I think one of the things that's come up a lot of folks have asked is specifically, it came up with the kids today too, about your choice to not use quotation marks in the dialogue. And I love your explanation because I know why, but you're about to find out too. So, and I was right, by the way. My mom's sitting right there. I always have to point her out. I'm always right, she says. So could you talk a little bit about the quotation marks specifically?
Yeah, well, even before I saw my heroes in literature do this, I was thinking about like, well, why? I mean, my first book was a work of nonfiction. And when I moved to fiction, I thought, it's not anyone actually speaking. If you're a journalist and someone has a quote, you put it in quotes, right? That's what a quote does. If it's nonfiction and you know, this person said this in that time of your life, then it's a quote. But in fiction, none of it is actually spoken if you take it seriously. And so if a quotation mark is only there as a diacritical mark to let people know that there's dialogue happening, I can do that by just indenting the line and telegraphing that someone's going to speak. And also too, if you need so much telegraph that it's staring you in the face, then you need to be a better reader. So I drop my quotation marks, and I think it's you know, as I said today, why clutter up the page with useless what did I say? Punctuation marks, yes. So.
And our poor English teachers were sitting in the back of the room going, oh my God.
Pulling their hair out.
6 months of work gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, look, there's a place for time and place for everything, but not for me anymore.
Well, I think too that we talked a little bit about even specifically with the characters of this book and the fact that they were truly the last two people on Earth. Why would you need quotation marks?
Exactly.
Yeah. The formality of that structure is no longer necessary to the world that they're inhabiting. Right. But I love the idea that it's all fiction, so none of this is a quote, right?
Yeah. You know, along the lines of that, let me anticipate a question about the fact that they have no name, and I've never described what they look like. I thought a lot about that. I didn't actually ever write them with names. It just seemed to me right out of the gate, if these are going to be the last two, then why would they need to be named? They're not going to call each other by their name. It's a father and a daughter. I'll tell you though, in the writing process, I did have a section where I had the bear ask the girl, "What did he call you?" And she said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, your father, when you weren't near him, what did he say to bring you near him?" And she said, "I was always near him." And then I thought, if that's true, then I don't need to write that. I'll just delete it. And so that disappeared, but it really made me think about this, about the closeness of the two. And so that's the answer to why there are no names. You know, think about it. And then, you know, Judeo-Christian creation stories gives us man first and man giving names to all of creation. And, you know, quite honestly, I wanted to reverse that. Take away the names at the end. So it seemed like a natural narrative arc as well. So that's my
I want to
thinking.
Tag on that too, because you spoke a little bit about this with the students this morning about the choice to use a father and a daughter, a male and a female. And I'd love for you to kind of repeat that. Yeah.
So early on I thought, well, if it's a man and a son, that's almost too much of a cliche. All son, I shouldn't say all, but the boy is always hunting and fishing and doing the things that the girl does. And so it was quite natural for me to make it the girl. I have a young daughter, and she was much younger when I started this. And then one of the students told me that in a lot of fiction now and other video games and things like that, the father-daughter relationship is quite cool. And I thought, oh no, so I'm a cliche after all. There's just no way around it. But and then I reached back into my theological handbag and I said, well, creation story does give us man first, so I thought it appropriate to finish it all with a woman.
Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you about this, and I'm sure I know it was obvious now, but in the last paragraph, the last chapter, in her final years, the old woman spoke to all of the living things of the earth between the mountain and the lakeshore, for they came to her without fear of dominion.
Yeah.
And ate with her the plants and the seeds and the fruit she grew and picked. That was such a direct driver for me to Genesis. So was that your intention with that? Now you've given dominion over all of the earth, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
God will send me to hell for plagiarizing.
You'll have company. It'll be fine.
I don't think I'll be lonely.
No. I'll buy you coffee. It'll
Okay,
be
cool.
good.
But no, exactly. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's just good reading. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Get to keep my job.
But I think this does go back to the question of form. That one thing as well as talking to students, and I don't think I have to be talking to students about this, but I just read a great deal, and I feel lucky to want to be a reader, and that writing is almost an outcropping of that, because I said to a student, I say this to any student, is no good writer has ever not been a great reader. There's the only way you can know or try to approach what the language is capable of. And if a writer is not thinking about what language is capable of, then I don't know. I don't know that I want to read that writer. So to me, it's all about pushing that envelope as well, you know.
Another piece of curiosity I had for you was your role, the role of possessions. From the very beginning, the passage that you started out with, talking about the preciousness of the glass, because the windows, because that's a lost art, and that how the beginning, talking about the girl and the books and the learning to read and the stories and the journals and the objects in the cabin, and yet at the very end of the book, when she goes back to the cabin and walks in and sees things kind of on the ground and some of her musty and moldy, I had this smell that came to mind when I read that passage. She took two things out of the cabin with her and walked away.
Yeah. Should I jump to the
I
end
would
and
love
read
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's not a fair assumption, but I'm guessing that you all read this, so that the link between the father teaching her how to read and write, reading Wendell Berry, one of my favorites.
I loved that. Yeah.
And obviously the hint to Tolkien, to the very end where she's now a young woman. She's not the girl anymore. I loved writing that, because it felt to me like a natural end to a story in which not just actual possessions but thought possessions were also came to an end.
Yeah.
So 2:12, is this it? The house looked just as she left it? Yeah. The house looked just as they had left it, but for the signs of winter. Broken pine limbs and piles of needles littered the roof and covered the porch and doorway like a mat. A birch spotted with woodpecker holes had broken out its base and fallen onto the tool shed at the edge of the woods, and as she approached to climb the stone steps that led to the front door, a raccoon fled with her gaze of kits. Though the day was warming, the house was cold inside. The hearth, swept clean a year ago, was piled with leaves stained with guano, and the table, too, was littered with the droppings of mice and chipmunks. She pulled a book of poems from the small shelf on which it sat, and the cover came off in her hands, and she put it back. She looked about and walked into the room where her father had slept and found it as before, but for the stillness and the spider webs. The bow with which he had hunted lay on the bed where he had left it. A hammock he used to string between two trees down by the lakeshore hung from a hook on the wall. She took the hammock, walked back into the kitchen, and left the house. So, actually, more interestingly, it's the hammock, not the bow. She doesn't need any of that anymore.
Yeah.
And she just needs to sleep, which is a nod to the bear, too. In the middle of the White Mountains. The bear does what bears do. He sleeps. She has to survive and become the woman she is on that other side of spring, in order to get home to bury the ashes of her father. So yeah, thank you. I had actually forgotten about that passage.
Yeah, you're welcome. It really resonated with me, and I think I love the idea that she walks out with the hammock, and that to me seemed like it was also a symbol for her that she can finally rest,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
she can
right.
stop, her journey's over in a lot of ways. Yeah. Even though she lives for quite a while, it sounds like.
She does, and that's a interesting thing too with respect to form is that I think the one thing writers, novelists especially, all have to deal with is time, the dynamic of time in plot, and that was a place where I just knew I had to speed up, because now that coming of age of the girl is over, and she no doubt lives. I hope it's pretty clear that within a page, she lives a long life. But that's not what's important. What's important is that 1 year essentially. And I'll tell you where I got this from, where I should say where I learned this from, and it's from Norman MacLean from A River Runs Through It. That's a nearly perfect novel, a short novel. If you're thinking about short novels, it's different from a long novel. If this were a 500-page novel, you'd get her life, and you'd get different time frames. But A River Runs Through It happens in the space of a weekend, pretty much. A week in the summer in Montana when he was a young man. And the time before and the time after his brother-in-law goes back to California, and all of that stuff is emerged in the house and in the fishing. You find out Paul has died. Within the space of a few pages, he's moved to Chicago, his brothers died, and he's an old man in no time at all. But that's the point of that presentation of the fly, if you will. It just happens like that, beautifully on the water, and the novel's over. Think of any short novel you love, and I guarantee you there will be a specific piece of time in which the entire story unfolds. Catcher in the Rye, A Weekend in New York. Great Gatsby, a summer, right? Test me on this one. Not right now, later. We're on camera, so not now. I might embarrass myself. But anyway, you see the point. So that's on purpose. Yeah.
It wouldn't have furthered the impact of the story
Exactly.
to have those details. I really appreciate that. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about your influence.
Okay.
Get to you as what brought this writerly career out of you. And the one thing I wonder always is, what are the books and authors and experience with story that made you want to do that made you want to be a writer?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, listening to my grandmother talk about the old country when I was a boy, and we'd sit around her stove, and my mom would always pour my mom a glass of rye, and my brother and I would get a Pepsi. And it was usually my younger brother and me, because everyone else was old and gone. So, and my grandfather had already passed away in the 50s. So by the time I was old enough to listen to these stories, I was first, second, third grade, that sort of thing, but never stopped. So she was a woman who was born in Pueblo, Colorado, because a lot of Slovaks worked in the smelter mines. Her mother was killed by a train over the Arkansas River. And if you read The Sojourn, that opening prologue is true. Her mother was killed by a train, and just before she died, her young infant son was in her arms, and she wrapped him up really quick, and then she threw him into the river. And a couple of boys who were swimming in the Arkansas swam over and rescued the little baby just as the woman above was killed by this train. And so her father then took his 4 girls and his infant son back to Austria-Hungary and raised them in this village, Vicaj, in the east of what's now Slovakia. And so she grew up at a time when the last of that empire was World War I, and all the boys went off to the war. My grandfather being one of them, whom she met later in America, but he actually lived in the same village. And so he fought on the Piave River against the Italians, was wounded and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Italy, in Sardinia, and then walked back to this new country of Czechoslovakia, and then a year later got on a troop ship, a converted troop ship, the Mount Clay in Hamburg, and went to America. My grandmother also did that. But when she was 16, she went to her father and she said, I want to go to America like the others who are going, because Masaryk and Wilson were great buddies. And there was there was an opening, especially for Czechs and Slovaks and Slavs. And so I don't know exactly the details of it, but you could go. But my grandmother had a special ticket in her pocket because she was a citizen. And so in Prague, she got her passport, and she went up to Hamburg, and they were not on the same boat, but it was pretty close. Her father said, yes, Lizzie, I knew you'd want to go one day. Here are your papers. And even then near Ellis Island, she kept getting in the line for the immigrants to get processed. And the pursers would put her in the other line. And she did that twice, and she got really scared. They're not going to let me in. And then someone explained to her in Slovak, they said, no, you have an American passport. So then she got in the citizen line. And then she met my grandfather in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, in Brookside. I was talking a lot about my grandmother because she would just talk about the old country, and not in a good way. She hated it. The woman my great-grandfather married was a classic evil stepmother, and my great-grandfather used to work as a shepherd in the Carpathian Mountains in the summer, and then would come down in the winter. And the stepmother was starving them, giving the food to her boys. And so that's why her dad let her go, because he just knew life would be better. And listening to this, you know what it was? It was about the struggle. She never spoke of it with any sort of idealism, always with a kind of pain. When people would want to go back, she'd say, why would I want to go back to that? So that was first. And then I just love to read. I think, I had older brothers, so they were throwing science fiction at me. They threw Jack Kerouac at me, which I loved. I still think On the Road is one of the greatest American novels. I mean, if you really study it, it's just amazing. So Kerouac, of course I read Catcher in the Rye. I don't like that novel much these days. And then I was lucky to go to college to study philosophy and literature, which my mom and dad said, go to college and read books. And I was like, and I was telling Brian today that my dad got a load of crap at work because he was going to let his son study philosophy. What the hell do you want to do that for? So he believed that an education had to be a moral as well as an intellectual one, and I was lucky. So, at St. John's College, Annapolis, it was the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then my sophomore year, it was the Odyssey in Greek, and Aeschylus and Sophocles and Plato and Aristotle. And then you go through the entire Western canon. And that was an education in itself. So that was where I realized that there was a whole system to this. And those books and those stories just over and over and over made me think that maybe I could possibly do this. But that I was a poet first.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think poetry was the way in which I started to look at the world as it taught me how to observe. And I do fine as a poet, but I think I got lost in more recently, like the last 20 years, with respect to how to write a poem now. I think I was telling you earlier that I basically studied all the great post-World War II poets, Galway Kinnell and William Matthews, and I think Henri Cole is the only poet I took a class with who's still alive. So, but I loved all those poetry. William Stafford, you guys know, and James Dickey. And so, though the first stuff I really had success with was prose, it was when I wanted to write a novel, I wanted to write a work of nonfiction about my grandfather, and I pitched it to my agent at the time, and she said, "It sounds to me like you want to write a novel." And I said, I didn't know that I was allowed to write a novel. So she said, "Oh yeah, I would actually really like to read a novel from you." And so that's when I sat down and wrote The Sojourn. I didn't sit down and write The Sojourn. I did years of research. And so, and a lot of, let me say that the recognition or the understanding of paring down a type of prose style into a more spare form, I learned because when I started out writing this story about my grandfather, kind of a European cold mountain, this young man who fights in a war and walks home. I thought it would be as grand epic, and it just got shorter and shorter and shorter until I realized what would be really cool is if, like a short novel, I had it told in the space of about 5 o'clock to just after midnight on a Good Friday. Wouldn't that be cool? And within months, it was chopped down to this novella. And I was like, wow, this is going to work. 33 publishers turned me down.
Yeah.
And then the last one, Bellevue Literary Press, Erica Goldman took it. And, everyone thought it would just do nothing. And then it took off. And I was like, I just got lucky. I'm just grateful. So the oral storytelling and my own reading and study of literature led to my being able to put the nuts and bolts together to write.
So speaking of that, then can you talk a little bit about what your writing discipline, your practice looks like?
Yes.
And then we'll come with your questions, I promise. Yeah.
Well, thanks to my training in religious life,
Yeah.
I'm an early riser.
Yeah.
And so I get up early. Now actually that my kids are going away and I can do this, I kind of like to sleep in sometimes. Take my time, have a tea, and but I like working in the morning. I had a great teacher who used to say, you got to give it the best time you've got. Mm-hmm. And I tell students that too. Imagine it's like your writer's life is a crystal bowl. It's pretty strong, right? But if you beat it around and you don't take care of it, it's going to smash. And you won't be good for anything anymore. So I try to protect it, and I give my writing time the best time I've got. But that said, I feel like throughout the day I'm always reading something, or I'm seeing something, or I'll take notes about people. My wife always says, like, be careful around him. He'll show up in a book. And so that's the other thing too. I've just gotten long in the tooth so that I'm never not writing,
right,
because the wires are working. Behind these walls and in the bathroom, everything, there's HVAC, there's electricity, there's things you have no concept of the network of it. And it brings us all this, and it doesn't fall down. That's a novel. And that's how I think about it, is putting it together like that. So, an allusion on page 2 becomes another one on page 20, and I think, wow, look, that one works really nice. And then 3, on page 40, I think if I pop that back in, it's now a theme, and it starts to really fire. That electrical impulse goes boom, 2, 20, 40, and by the end, it's now a part of the entire life of the novel. So that's what I think about and how I do these things. I'm surprised every time I finish a book that I actually finished a book. And every time I start one, I think, oh man, I'm never going to ever write another book again. Not because I'm tired of it, because I don't think I'm capable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of always a Zen mind, beginner's mind.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to remember that, giving it your best. So I'm hoping we have some folks with questions in the room. Mike has got a mic for you, and I'm going to ask that you wait for the mic so that the folks that are watching online can hear your question. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and here we go. Remember who, what, why, where, and how. When.
Hi, I'm Roger, and I really appreciate this. Wonderful. Midway through the book, I wondered if the girl and his father were indigenous, and because of the skills they had, and so it caused me to pause and think back, and then I had that in my frame of reference throughout the remainder. I wondered, for you, my question is, had you thought of that, or was that just not really even relevant?
Yeah, it's not that it's not relevant. The skills are certainly of a tradition, right? But in the same way that I would say the man and the girl have no name, if you raise this story to the level of the universal instead of the particular, it doesn't matter quite literally to what tribe they belong. They're literally the last 2 humans left on Earth. So even the idea of indigenous or of an identity just wouldn't be an issue. I mean, I really wanted to push it to that existential level. I did a great deal of study on self bows. Self bow is the only thing I didn't make because I was telling someone earlier there was a beautiful 8-inch diameter oak in my front yard that I wanted to timber and cut into staves and cure them and make a bow. And they say you should do that so you get 4 tries at it, because you're gonna suck on the first 2. And I was looking at that tree one day and I was thinking, I cannot kill you. And now it's a beautiful 12-inch oak, and and I'm really glad I didn't. I mean, I made some out of single trees, like a choke cherry that was about 4, 5 inches. So I tried the tillering process and things like that. But to answer your question very specifically, I did think about that, and I don't get that question a lot, but I do get it occasionally, and my only answer is that that I wanted it to be read at the level of the existential, of the universal, and so those particulars just fall away, right?
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Roger.
How did you know how to describe things like making the bow, making snowshoes, and how did you know how to describe the girl falling in the river through the ice and beginning to be pulled down the river?
Yeah.
Please tell me you didn't try that for them. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the Greek word for making is poetes, right? So anyone who seeks to be creative is a maker right out of the gate. And anyone, I believe, who's going to write with any kind of authenticity has to take that leap into a kind of poetry of making. I love writers who write about work. I didn't read the section on the self-bow, which is one of my favorite sections to write. But it's about finding the particulars of that are necessary to move the story. And so I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania in the cold in the 70s. So, I say to folks, look, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there on survival that will give you a sense of like, you should do this. But also when I was a boy, I've slept in the snow and I've eaten food like that. And so I've gotten to A to B to C, sometimes to D, wondering like, okay, is this the last D I'm gonna get to? Did I make a big mistake tonight? So to get to E is not much of a jump. It would be, again, existentially, right? If you fell into a frozen river. But I'm a former ocean lifeguard. I know what it's, I've seen people do bad things in the water. And so my only point is this, there's enough you can learn about how to do anything. And so then the particulars of how a thing is made, it really just becomes putting as creatively as you can, but as correctly as you can with respect to the logic of it, onto the page and see if it works. And I think those work on the page, do they? I don't think mechanically. I'm worried both about the mechanics and the beauty of the language. And so I work hard on those two as a relationship. And I don't move on until I've got it. So sometimes you got to move on and think, oh, well, if I got that one right. But if you do your work, chances are you do all right. So that's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Yes, I was wondering, what was the symbolism of the creature that scrapes the father's hand?
Yeah.
And I wondered, as I was reading, I thought it might be an alien, and that we were going to go with whole supernatural. But then, or was it Eve's apple? Was he reaching for civilization, or I wonder what that meaning was?
Okay, I can tell you this because I wrote the book. One of the biggest themes in this book is the known and the unknown, and there's as much unknown as there is known, right? There's a lot that the father knows, but the father knows that there's a lot he doesn't know, and so this nod to what had been with respect to civilization is a way in which the father, the girl doesn't. The girl sees a mirror and she's not going to, think about her mom. Oh, is that what she looked like? She says, yeah, I can use this for an arrowhead. That's what she knows. She entirely in the moment. But the father isn't so much. And so I imagine a raccoon or something that has the tetanus bacillus in its spit, which is most furry animals, right? Tetanus has been around forever and will be around when we're gone. It's just a fact. And so, but in those foundation walls exist alongside of this Edenic beauty of the world that's emerging, the possibility of death. And so, look, the father had to die. I realized halfway through that was going to be the only way that I could get to the end of this arc of the narrative. I'm often asked, like, how's the girl going to reproduce? Will someone come from the West? Or will someone else be found? No, it's over. End of story. Literally, quite literally, end of story. And so the father dies exactly midway. And I thought hard about why and how he could die. And this seemed to me a really interesting way in which that capacity not to be in control of what he would find. So that liminal place between the known and the unknown, which becomes deadly. And that's how the fact that he dies tetanus, horrible death, is just how it shook out. Again, with respect to authenticity too. I mean, that seemed to me the most likely predator at the time, the tetanus bacillus. So there you go.
I think we mentioned this the other day, or Mike did, but one of our enterprise classrooms actually held a funeral for the father.
Oh.
So
That was hard for me to write.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Any other questions? Hang on just a second, Randy. Yeah.
Did I mention
did.
I did just now. I'm just.
Sorry. We're
Yeah, we
so
should
close.
reproduce.
Do I need to use this?
Well,
It's for the
Yeah.
video. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I was, you write so intimately about the girl's relationship to everything around her.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, as a woman, you
Yeah.
did not mention menstruation. You didn't, and that relationship with the moon, and she, there was so much intimacy with
Yeah.
everything about her. But I was just curious, was that intentional or?
Great question. I had a long conversation with my editor about this, and I brought it up. I
Okay.
said, I think I need to write about this because it is about this journey of the girl to being a young woman. I have a daughter, and she thought, and I decided she was right, that it would be too specific to the story as it approached the end and sort of sped up in time. It's necessary, but it's real and it's authentic. But I think we both decided that it wouldn't be necessary. I could still get to the place of the old woman dying and and laying on the ground for so long that a maple tree sprouts through her body. But it also didn't. The fact that there was no. How could now I'm thinking back to this conversation, but that's all we came up with at the end of it, like a long, serious talk about this, and I just remember hanging up the phone, thinking, "All right, then I'm not going to write about that." So I wish I had a better answer for you. But,
That's
yeah.
come up in almost every book discussion we've had, and I
Really?
think especially as women,
Yeah, exactly.
it's such
yes.
it was sitting in the back of my head. I
Right,
know you're
right.
thinking about the logistics, right?
Yeah.
But also I was curious about, the decision to even have the timeline where she's, her father dies, she makes the journey, she's 13, 14,
exactly.
which is, and then
Right.
it skips to, so you did skip that. I
Yeah.
did wonder if that was intentional.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't have to talk about this. Yeah.
I think retrospectively, it's possible, if I give myself some grace, that it is a very good description of a kind of barrenness for her. There's just no possibility. And so, of course, she would have menstruated, but well, that's a good, and I think that's what my editor said too. She's like, maybe not. No one's been in that situation before. So yeah, great question. But yes, I did. It was a serious place of discernment, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. Anybody else?
Oh, there we go.
Hold on just a second. Thanks, Melissa. Janice, is there anyone online? Okay.
Thank you for a beautiful lyrical piece. Did they know they were the last people? How did they know they were last people, if so? And then what would be the point of learning all those wonderful things? What would their inspiration for teaching if they knew they were the end of it?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, they're all good questions, right? But this is part of the mindset that I thought about, and the question of what happened always comes up, and my answer is it doesn't matter, and that's the answer to the distance and what is known and unknown. That just remains unknown, and I imagined so much time having passed that it was just no longer even a question about what happened. It just doesn't matter. I mean, it could have been anything. It's just sterility, if you will. But what that means to them is, I just believe that there's the fact of the narrative of two people, so that there was meaning in following the arc of their own lives. Early on in COVID, I was zooming into a high school class in California, and a young woman wanted to know, a high school senior, why the girl didn't take her life out of sheer loneliness of being the last person on earth. And I thought, wow. And I'll say this, is that I believe that because nature understands story at a level perhaps higher than we do, that one of the emergence of the bear, which I didn't really talk about tonight, the emergence of the bear as a kind of veil lifting was nature's way of saying, we've been watching you, and we see your story, and we're gonna mourn you when you go, in the same way that the girl mourns the father. And that purpose of life is simply in others knowing that they have lived the life of a narrative arc, that their own lives had purpose in the very daily pursuit and the love of everything from a father for a daughter for a father, to the love of the land, to love of literature. All of these things seem to me to give something purpose enough to just to wake up in the morning and keep on the journey. And that's what I was imagining. I have written here in the back of my book, there's the writer Michael Ondaatje, who's probably my favorite living writer after McCarthy's sadly passed. He says at the end of his novel Warlight, "Your own story is just one, and perhaps not the important one. The self is not the principal thing." And so one of the ideas I was thinking about with this novel was that there's a kind of hubris to this vertical way in which humans think we exist in this world, and it's, it goes back to the Greeks, certainly Enlightenment philosophy as well too, but there seems to be a movement, everything from the understanding of the fact that trees communicate, that's science, to one of the same scientists, Peter Wohlleben, has a book called the Moral Life of Animals, to a growing understanding of the horizontal, how can I say this? It's a horizontal plane of existence on which our purpose exists. And so I want to think about that more, and if I were to leave you with anything tonight, it would be, wouldn't that notion of accepting that we are not the principal thing, the self is not the principal thing, might be a kind of, you know, what is Thomas Kuhn call it, the scientific, the structural revolution that we might need to just be better stewards of the planet. What if the planet was a better steward of us than we were of it? Wouldn't that be something? And so part of my, I was writing myself into this perspective as I was writing The Bear. I came away from it thinking, yeah, I'd like to think about it differently. I've heard this book read from the perspective of climate science and cautionary tales and dystopic futures and things like that, but what if it's just about looking out, seeing the world not as though we understand it better than we do, but just that we're part of it in a way that we actually don't know, that we can't understand. But it'd be a really cool journey just to let it, to understand that unknowability in a little deeper way. So to me, that's why the girl is happy to live her life. I bet she lived a long, long life, longer than we could ever imagine, almost like, you know, the biblical Methuselah, right? Why not? So
No traffic.
no traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there. That's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. Well, I think we have run out of time, if you can believe that. Before I give you a close, I'd like to everybody thank Andrew.
Thank you.
When we wrap, Andrew's available to sign some books. And do we have a table set up for that? Okay. Maybe just set him up, Jennifer. We'll just have it at the front there. So if you brought your book and you'd like to sign it, you're welcome to do that. Or he can sign wrists, I don't know. Mike mentioned earlier, and we've talked about this a few times, about our decision to not take funding from the NEA. And that was not a decision we took lightly. And Andrew is part of the reason that we were able to do that. And Mike mentioned the funders, but I also wanted to thank you. When we first talked about what could be facing us in the future with, you know, some of the impact in our world to, you know, just the value of arts, I had this thought, and I think I shared it with members of the board and my staff, that as long as our community and the people here found value in words and in communication and in stories and in empathy, that the work that we do to cultivate clear thinking and good writing was important to you, that we'd be fine. And you proved our point. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, for supporting us, for continuing to show up. And as long as you keep doing that, we'll keep doing it for you. And I'm grateful to be a part of that. So with that, enjoy yourselves this evening. We'll see you next Friday at Fireside, and have a good night. Thank you. Really nice. It was great. I'm looking at my questions and you're answering.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Yeah. Thank you. This was great.
Excellent.
Yeah. This was the most present.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, I appreciate these conversations, and some folks make it easier than others, and you're one of those that I'm grateful. You're
super.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, where's the table? Let's
So
do this.
just right up front, I'll walk you over there.
Oh, you know what? Can I borrow a pen again?
Yeah, we'll have some
That's
pens up there.
super.
We'll bring a Sharpie or two for you. How's that?